Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations, getting caught up with friends of long-standing, meeting new like-minded folks. My name is Mary Woolley. I'm the president of Research America. We're delighted to welcome you here today at this magnificent site, the New York Academy of Sciences, which really stands for a nation and a city and a state that cares about research, cares about science, and we're aligned in that regard. I know we're going to have a good discussion here today, and I hope that when we conclude, you will all feel allied in advocacy, ready to really make the case for global health research like you've never done it before, that you'll feel inspired by up-to-date stories, by data, and by the kinds of tools that it takes to make a difference, to convince people who may not already be convinced, whether they serve in the Congress or in state legislatures or are appointed officials, convinced that they need to make global health research a high priority in their planning, in their policies, in their voting, in their decision making. We have many special guests here today, but I especially want to extend a warm welcome to Congresswoman Nita Lowey, who will be addressing us in just a few minutes. I also want to thank our program partners, AVAC, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, SUNY Downstate Medical Center, Treatment Action Group, or TAG, the Global Alliance for TB Drug Development, and the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. Thank you all for working with us on this program. I also want to extend a warm welcome to the panel and to our moderator, Laurie Garrett, whom I will introduce shortly. Well, over the past decade, New York, and specifically New York City, has become a center of innovation for life-saving global health research. This research helps combat some of the world's most lethal diseases. And local residents are recognizing the importance of such research. According to a new Research America poll that we commissioned very recently here in New York, 64% think global health is an issue about which New York residents should be concerned. And 63% believe that spending money on global health is important to the economy of New York as well as to the world. And yet the same poll indicates a lack of awareness about where this research takes place. Kind of a disturbing number. 93% of New Yorkers don't know where global health research is conducted in their own state. They aren't even willing to guess. Now that's a missed opportunity for advocates, for those who are really committed to global health research, because public support stems in part from awareness and local pride, from knowing that life-saving medical discoveries are emerging right here, close to home. It also stems from knowing that federal and state tax dollars are flowing into one's own community, creating jobs and economic activity, stimulating private sector investment and business activity. That's why our collective advocacy is so important. It's important to get the message out about New York businesses and academic institutions and NGOs that are literally changing the global health landscape. And in a globalized world, that means protecting New Yorkers as well as those who live abroad. Now, not only is New York home to two major pharmaceutical companies involved in global health R&D, Pfizer and Bristol-Myers Squibb, but also to more global health product development partnerships than any other state in the nation. These partnerships, which bring together the public, private, and philanthropic sectors to speed new discoveries to the marketplace, have literally transformed the global product development landscape. With pharma powerhouses, PDPs, and renowned academic institutions contributing to global product development, New York is both an innovation hub and an exemplar for the economic benefits that global health R&D delivers. New York State received more than $2 billion in National Institutes of Health research grants in 2011. creating more than 28,000 jobs within the state. And even in times of recession, the bioscience industry continues to generate profit. According to the New York Biotechnology Association, employment in biotech R&D has increased by 32.6% from 2007 to 2010 in New York State. Only the state of Washington, where the Gates Foundation is located, that state, has experienced more growth in global health research in particular during that time. In the last 10 to 15 years, over 20 New York organizations with a stake in global health R&D have either been created or have expanded their mandate and added locations, centers, or projects. And for all those reasons, and because it's the right thing to do, we all need to take our part and do our part to make sure that global health R&D is and remains a public priority. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And I will say that there aren't a lot of people, unfortunately, in the United States Congress today who understand and act on the importance of health and health research as a priority in this nation. We're very fortunate to have Congresswoman Nita Lowey with us today to talk about her commitment and her passion for health and for global health research. Congresswoman Lowey is currently serving her 12th term in the Congress, representing parts of Westchester and Rockland counties. She was first elected to the U.S. House in 1988. She's a member of the powerful House Appropriations Committee. She has worked with the chair of Research America, the Honorable John Edward Porter, for many years, and I've already delivered his greetings to the Congresswoman. Congressional Quarterly has cited Congresswoman Lowey as one of the 50 most effective members of Congress. I was telling her earlier that we need another 50 or 100 or ideally 535 effective members of Congress, and I know the public would agree. Few members have taken key leadership roles on so many vital public policy issues. She's led the effort to make our nation more secure by improving first responders' preparedness and equipment, and preparing also for a possible avian flu pandemic. She's worked to increase healthcare access and biomedical research, and spearheaded the effort to more than double funding for breast cancer research. She's a fierce advocate for increasing developmental assistance abroad on the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee. I know you will all join me in welcoming our most wonderful Congresswoman, Nita Lowey. Thank you.
I was just laughing with Mary because I did go to Mount Holyoke College, and for those of us who graduated from Mount Holyoke College, the name Mary Woolley is very special. But you're very special in your own right, so thank you so much for that very generous introduction. And I want to thank Laurie, Garrett, pleasure to see you again, and Alexandra Courts, wherever you are, who helped arrange for my coming here. And I must say that I feel very humbled by this very distinguished group of people. I'm sorry that John Porter isn't here. And I must say, Mary, we miss John Porter, because those are the days when support for the NIH was bipartisan. And John Porter was really one of the strongest advocates on our committee. He served on the committee that funds labor, health, human services, education, and I've worked very closely with him. So we need the John Porters back in the Congress again. But let me thank you very much for, number one, giving me the opportunity to be in this extraordinary space. I am a lifelong New Yorker, and I've never been up here. Just about 3 weeks ago, I brought the Homeland Security Committee to New York, and I was above in a helicopter looking around at all the assets we have, the bridges and the refineries, etc. But this is amazing. So congratulations for holding your meeting in this amazing, amazing space. I really can't believe it. I've seen many wonderful views, but this one is really phenomenal. Couple of words, because I know that you have some outstanding panelists with you today. I want to thank you for inviting me here. Frankly, it is such a distinguished group of thoughtful leaders in global health research and development, and to discuss the challenges and hurdles we must overcome to improve foreign assistance and make the world a healthier, safer place. And that is a challenge today. One of the core principles that has guided my work in Washington for over 20 years is the belief that the United States must play an active, robust role in global affairs. An enlightened foreign policy is not only our moral obligation, but it is vital to our national security interests. Healthy mothers have healthy children, which in turn lead to stronger families and communities. Open, healthy, functioning societies are at the heart of long-term global security because they directly confront the conditions that give rise to radicalism and instability. The United States has made unprecedented investments in global health over the last 60 years, and these efforts have arguably been some of our most effective. With other donors and governments, we've made impressive strides, eliminated polio in all but 3 countries in the world, increased life expectancy in many developing countries from 40 to 65 years, extended the lives of millions of people living with HIV/AIDS, and doubled child survival rates. And yet, as you well know, over 7 million people await access to HIV treatment, and nearly 10 million children die each year before their 5th birthday. Tuberculosis kills someone every 25 seconds. Nearly 1.4 million people in 2010 alone, while malaria takes the lives of 2 children every minute in sub-Saharan Africa. And millions of children remain vulnerable to the lifelong consequences of brain damage associated with iodine deficiency disorder, stunting from malnutrition, and blindness from vitamin A deficiency. One way that we can address these ongoing health crises is through investment in research and development. In the last decade, advancements in medical research have led to important scientific breakthroughs, better healthcare delivery systems, increased affordability of medicines, and millions of lives extended and saved. Through our research and development efforts, we now have a pediatric dose of the primary drug used to treat Chagas disease and the first new combination treatment for sleeping sickness developed in 25 years. We are making significant progress towards a malaria vaccine, and we've learned that treatment with antiretroviral drugs substantially reduces HIV transmission. Much more remains to be done, but these kinds of developments help make our global health work more effective, allowing us to save more lives and have a greater impact throughout the world. As a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee and ranking member on the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, soon to be chair again, I I assume this is oh, wow. I was saying that could be dangerous, but I had because this must be a bipartisan group, but obviously a lot of you agree with my point of view, and I thank you. Well, I am a very proud supporter of a strong supporter, a very proud supporter of our global health budget, and I know you are here. In addition to the almost $8.2 billion we included in fiscal year 2012 for global health programs, the spending bill included $348 million for global health through CDC and more than $30 billion for biomedical research at the National Institutes of Health. Investment in global health research and development is not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Global health research and development creates jobs for New Yorkers, with 80,000 people employed in the sector of New York City alone. Here in New York, we have 7 of the top 50 American research universities, as well as several major product development partnerships and leading private companies, all working on the next global health breakthrough. In fact, as Research America has shown, New York leverages each federal dollar at almost a 4-to-1 ratio, stretching each taxpayer dollar even further. Despite the critical importance and significant economic impact of these programs, funding for global health is threatened again this year. The House majority's decision to adopt a budget number that is substantially lower than the bipartisan level from last year's Budget Control Act, and that's important for you to know, will mean deep cuts across a number of accounts, including the Global Health Initiative at state and U.S. aid, the National Institutes for Health, and the Centers for Disease Control. For example, under Paul Ryan's plan, and by the way, Paul Ryan happens to be a friend of mine. When I was the chair, I took a bipartisan delegation to the Middle East, and we've worked together on many issues, but on this issue, as I've told him clearly, he's just plain wrong. The number, and by the way, if you're on TV a couple of times a week, that doesn't automatically make you right, because on the budget issues, he's just plain wrong. The number of NIH grants for research projects would be reduced by over 16,000 in the next decade, and the National Science Foundation would eliminate funding for over 13,000 researchers, students, and teachers in 2014 alone. Next week, I will return to Washington, where work on the fiscal year 2013 budget will begin in earnest, and you can rest assured that I will continue to fight for robust funding for all our global health programs, including critical research and development. And frankly, I'm here today to call on everyone in this room, everyone who understands that these programs are absolutely essential to our economic prosperity, our global leadership, and our national security, to help me in that fight. It's up to you and like-minded people to tell Congress that you care about research and that you understand how global health, research, and development creates jobs and fuels economic development. Make sure your representatives understand the links between the work that you do, our overall development goals, and our national security priorities. Now is truly a critical moment for you to use your collective voice to protect these investments in our future. I know I'm speaking to the choir, so I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share my views. You really have a very important job to do, and I think it's essential that you use your skill, your expertise, your wisdom to reach out to members of Congress and let them know how important this research is. Thank you very much and have a great conference.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Your passion really is just so evident and inspires us all. And you may be speaking to the choir here, but we hope that this is a choir that's going to be heard from now. And it isn't about persuading you, clearly, but there are many more and more members who haven't got it yet, wherever they may be located. And it is imperative to make that case, as you have so well said. So now we're going to move into the panel discussion, and starting with a few remarks from our moderator, the estimable Laurie Garrett. And Laurie, if you'd come on up, I just want to say a few words about Laurie's very distinguished leadership over the past years. She's currently the Senior Fellow for Global Health at the Council on Foreign Relations here in New York. I was really struck to learn, although I'm familiar with her books, I didn't realize that you are, Laurie, the only writer to have received all three of the three big P's of journalism, the Peabody, the Polk, and the Pulitzer. That is no small achievement. Congratulations. And I was also not aware of your newest book, which I think where we're located today is particularly important to note. It's called I Heard the Sirens Scream: How Americans Responded to the 9/11 and anthrax attacks. And that is really meaningful as we sit here in this beautiful setting overlooking the 9/11 site. So I imagine that you have just sold a few books here today just by the fact of your attendance, certainly to me. We're delighted to have you, Laurie, and look forward to a few words from you and then to your superb moderating skills. Thank you.
As I sit here looking out over Ground Zero and recalling what this was all like in September 2001, I feel like I have to remind you that you're seated in World Trade Center number 7. Now, Rudolph Giuliani had decided that this was the smart building to put the command post for all future attacks. As a result, the command post was, of course, destroyed when Mohammed Atta flew the first jet from Boston into the North Tower. And we found ourselves realizing that preparedness was not just a word, that being prepared for disaster, being prepared for worst-case scenarios was part and parcel of governance. It was a key element of governance. But we also discovered that governance was rife with lies and half-truths. And from the very first moment that Mohammed Atta's jet hit the North Tower, we were in the grips of a massive public health catastrophe that continues today and which continues to be denied and covered up by key elements in the federal government. I'm, of course, referring to what we inhaled and continued to hail for 4 months as the plume burned, the pile burned and the plume rose. And we now know that not just first responders, but citizens of Brooklyn, because the plume blew that way for 4 months, have suffered long-term health problems that will continue and that will haunt us for a very, very long time. I don't think we've even begun to see the tip of the iceberg on that particular health catastrophe. So when we speak about global health, it's easy to draw on our own experience. I think it's one of the reasons that here in New York City, we have a sister city feeling with New Orleans, certainly in Brooklyn, especially as this is the 150th anniversary of the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and they've chosen to celebrate it with all New Orleans music for 2 weeks. And it's because Katrina felt like the same kind of disaster we'd been through in 2001 in a way. a sense that preparedness had not been taken seriously, that the voices saying, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, were not heeded and not listened to. And now, as we look at the question of global health, I want to give you a few things to heed and pay attention to. Congresswoman Lowey just gave you basically the pitch for why you need to think about global health support and, you know, beat the bushes and scream loudly on behalf of global health funding. But I want to frame it in a bigger picture. At the Council on Foreign Relations, where I run the global health program, we've been doing a lot of number crunching and trying to figure out just how bad the situation really is globally. Any of you, I know most of you are from the NGO sector, so you probably all have partners in various developing countries that you're working with, and you're hearing in the trenches about longer lines to get antiretroviral therapy, about stockouts of tuberculosis drugs, stockouts of malaria nets, and so on. But let me put it in the big picture for you. Today, the World Health Organization, in real dollars, has a budget that is less than it had in 1990. Do you ever get that? So WHO is, in fact, sort of falling apart. It's had layoffs on a massive scale. And now, because the Swiss franc has become the monetary place to hedge, it's the currency that all the speculation folks that are afraid of the EU and the Euro's decline are buying Swiss francs. The Swiss franc has inflated 32% against the dollar. WHO and the Global Fund and Gavi and all those institutions that are the major multilateral players in global health are based in Geneva. They get their income stated in US dollars, but their payroll is in Swiss francs. So what does 32% inflation mean? That means you've got to cut off a lot of programs, lay off a lot of personnel. You're working on a smaller budget every day. On top of it all, of course, we've seen a massive catastrophe with the Global Fund. Many countries that were key donors have frozen their assets pending various kinds of corruption investigations regarding the so-called missing money, some $39 million that went to key countries and cannot be accounted for. But in addition, there's been a huge shakeup. The whole leadership is now new, and the Global Fund is taking a new direction. It is unable to take on any new commitments until 2014 and cannot currently even meet commitments that it made in 2011. So the Global Fund is a problem area. Now, if you crunch the total net, how much money is on the global health landscape, and total up absolutely everything, what have donors given? What are the nations themselves putting forward in poor and developing countries? You see that only now, in 2012, has the impact of the 2008 financial crisis actually started to result in a decline in the global net. However, there's been almost no growth for about 3 years. And as we look at the total net, why didn't we see a decline until just now? Because the United States stepped up to the plate, because Bill Gates stepped up to the plate. But what we have seen is a huge number of players disappear. So we've lost all of Southern Europe as donors. And in many Southern European countries, the commitments made as long ago as 5 or 6 years remain unfilled. Russia has gotten away with committing every single year and never fulfilling a single commitment. We've seen a shift in what the donors are willing to give money for. So the UK, which used to be the #2 giver after the United States for HIV programs, has now walked away and is focused entirely on Gavi and child vaccine efforts, which is great, but it shifts a huge level of focus and dollars, or in this case, pounds. What has happened is, while the net has not decreased, the dependency on the United States has soared. The activist demands that the United States be a major donor and a major player, well, they got met. We are a major donor, a major player, but who else is on the field? Indeed, if you look at a bar graph of total donation for global health for this year's spending, 2012, you'll see United States government, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then everything else is way down here. Now, that means the two Washingtons are calling the shots, Seattle and DC. It also means tremendous fragility to the entire enterprise. Because even a 5% cut in U.S. government global health spending is a 5% that nobody else will make up somehow. Italy is not suddenly going to have money. Spain is not going to have money again for foreign assistance for a long time. Greece is a bye-bye. And you go down the list and you realize if we cannot protect the U.S. commitment to global health spending, every single program in global health is going to have to chop its budget. So that affects us right here in New York City, as we're now going to learn. And if I could have the panel please all come up and take your seats. You're going to hear something about what kinds of programs specifically here in New York City are playing a major role in this picture and how they're likely to be affected if indeed these sorts of cutbacks play out, what it will mean for the city residents of New York and so on. I want to say at the outset that I think we are preaching to the choir, as Nita Lowey put it. I don't think there's any, let me just, for the sake of our panelists, so that we all know who we're talking to, I'd like you all to give me a show of hands. How many of you work for an NGO? Okay, that's at least 50% of the room. How many of you work for a New York-based pharmaceutical or biotech company? Oh, 2 people, 3. Okay, underrepresentation, I would say. And how many of you work elsewhere in the private sector? Okay, so we're basically speaking to people who are already engaged in global health efforts in some way. That should mean that less background explanatory sort of efforts here and more really targeting what are we getting out of it here in New York City, what specifically are we working on, and what's your level of dependency on federal funding should we see a serious cut in that direction. So first what I want to do is just, we're going to go from here down, each of you 2 minutes, I mean 2. And what I want you to just tell the audience is who you are, what the name of your organization is, and to what degree you are based and operating out of New York City or the New York State area.
Laurie, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to throw away my cheat sheet because you just blew the whole thing. So that goes by the wayside. Name is Mel Spigelman, and I'm with the Global Alliance for TB Drug Development. And very briefly, for those of you who don't know, we're a product development partnership whose mission it is to discover, develop, and bring out new affordable, available, and adoptable TB treatments. The Congresswoman gave us a little bit of insight into the magnitude of the TB problem, and I'll just give you one statistic. 2 billion people are affected. That's with a B. They're infected with TB around the world. That's the present situation, not going into the deaths and all the other problems. And no new TB treatment or vaccine or even diagnostic. The newest one is about 40, 50 years old. That's been the state of affairs. So where are we today, though? We're on the verge, thanks to organizations like the U.S. government, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, et cetera. We're on the verge now of having, for example, a TB regimen that, if you look at multi-drug resistant TB, can shorten treatment from 2 years to 4 months, cut costs by 90%. And in that process, we have gotten cut by USAID because of their problems, which forces us into very untenable situations at a time when we need more.
I wanted an introduction. Now you've just also told us what you're doing. Paul.
Yes. My name is Paul Vandenbroucke. I work for Pfizer. I'm responsible for clinical development for emerging markets, which in the Pfizer definition is Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Central and Eastern Europe. And so we're based in New York, actually. A little bit further down from the Chrysler Tower over there is our worldwide headquarters where I work. We also have extensive facilities in New York State that are involved with global health, and the most important one of that is Pearl River, where we have the worldwide R&D facility for vaccines, and we also produce the majority of our vaccines in that facility.
Thanks very much, Laurie, and thanks to Research America for organizing this event. My name is Rachel Cohen. I'm the Regional Executive Director of the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, D&DI, in North America. We're a not-for-profit R&D organization that develops new drugs or improved formulations of existing drugs for neglected patients suffering from a range of diseases, including human African trypanosomiasis or sleeping sickness, leishmaniasis, sometimes called the visceral form Kala-Azar, Chagas disease, specific filarial worm infections, and pediatric HIV, which doesn't sound like it belongs in that list I just gave you. Unlike TB, HIV, and malaria, the diseases that we work on are sort of barely pronounceable. Most New Yorkers will probably never have heard of them, and certainly don't affect people in our midst, so to speak. Chagas might be an exception in certain pockets in the United States, but we're just focused on developing the best possible treatments where there haven't been any available historically because of the lack of interest from the pharmaceutical industry in non-lucrative markets, so to speak, to deliver better treatments for patients. And we have several other things that we can share about New York partners and so forth. But thank you.
Margaret.
Hi, thanks, Laurie, and thanks to Research America. I'm Margie McGlynn. I lead the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, which is a not-for-profit research and advocacy organization. We're headquartered here in New York, in Lower Manhattan. I like to say as far south as you can go on Broad Street without falling in the water. But we also have a lab in Brooklyn, thanks to the support of Mayor Bloomberg and New York City, where we have about 34 or 35 lab scientists. And we're working together with researchers around the world to try to come up with a globally effective AIDS vaccine that can bring the ultimate end to this epidemic.
How many people work for IAVI in New York City?
We have about 120 in the Manhattan office and about 30, 35 in the Brooklyn lab.
Jack.
Thank you, Laurie, and thanks to Research America for organizing this. I'm Jack DeHovitz. I'm on the faculty of SUNY Downstate Medical Center, which I guess is probably right through the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth building over there, in Brooklyn. As you know, Brooklyn's been adversely affected by HIV, which is my area of expertise. Yet early in the epidemic, we provide great leadership around both treatment as well as research into pediatric disease as well as disease in women. In the early to mid-1990s, through the Fogarty Center of the NIH, we were funded to provide AIDS research training to an area that critically needed it, that of Central and Eastern Europe, which has the most rapidly rising epidemic now. And since then, we've been able to train over 80 trainees who have gone back and have provided key leadership in the 9 or 10 countries in that region which have been devastated by the disease.
Jack, I want to start with you. I'm going to ask you a terrible question.
There you go.
Terrible. And so we don't even want to have to imagine this, but let's. If we had, as Congresswoman Lowey said, 16,000 grants cut by the NIH, and one of them was your program and the support that you enjoy from NIH. Tell me what that means. What disappears when that happens?
Well, I can give you both domestic and international implications. Domestically, as I said, we have two major foci. We're looking at the impact of exposure to antiretroviral drugs that prevent transmission from mother to child in children. That study would stop. We would have no idea of the long-term effects of that. We're looking at what happens to HIV-infected women who age. What are the implications both for menopause, for cognition, for bone disease, for heart disease? That would stop. Globally, as I indicated, we've trained over 80 individuals, have 8 to 10 people in the pipeline right now. That would stop. And with that, their ability to take other funding opportunities, such as the Global Fund to the extent that they exist, and other intramural or intercountry opportunities, and that would stop also. So it would have a dramatic impact.
And one of the things that's unique about New York City, and in particular where you're located in Brooklyn, is that you have a patient population that in some cases speaks the same languages as you're dealing with in Eastern Europe. And you have personnel that uniquely, what might not be the case in many other parts of the United States, can directly communicate with folks in Estonia or Latvia or the Czech Republic.
No, there's no question that our highly Russian-speaking research and care population informs our ability to provide training and other research activities abroad.
Margie, you similarly, for IAVI, have a unique situation in terms of being located in New York City as a sort of international hub with roughly 30% of our population foreign-born. How are you able to draw on that? How does that put you in a unique position being based here for international efforts?
Right, and one of the reasons we chose to locate the headquarters in Manhattan was the accessibility and availability of a globally educated and raised population for our workforce, and that's very important for us. Even if individuals aren't already living here, the willingness to relocate to the U.S. From Europe, from Africa, from many parts of the world, if you say Manhattan, is a different reaction than I've had in my past life trying to recruit people to, rural Pennsylvania, for example. So that's a tremendous help, but also the scientific personnel that we need. The availability of the research universities and academic medical centers in the New York area also gives us access to that workforce, which is so important for what we're trying to do.
I know you have laboratories in a special relationship that was worked out with Mayor Bloomberg in the Brooklyn Army Terminal down in Sunset Park. What's going on in there?
So the city is trying to build a bioscience park to encourage startup companies or early stage companies to locate there and to take advantage of the workforce we have and the many other benefits of locating in the New York area. So we are the first tenant, and the city is working hard on bringing in additional tenants into the bioscience park.
Rachel, I know that your organization has a headquarters outside in Switzerland, yes?
Yeah.
So how much is actually going on here in New York?
Well, our office is actually a very small regional office. DNDI's headquarters are, as you say, in Geneva, and we have 6 regional offices. I should say that our founding partners were Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières, which has their U.S. headquarters here in New York, as well as 5 public sector research organizations. Our organization is probably an example of what happens when the U.S. government doesn't invest in research and development. For example, unlike any other disease-specific program at USAID, TB, HIV, malaria, even family planning, there is no federal funding right now for late-stage product development for neglected tropical diseases. So NIH, of course, funds a great deal of basic research. That's important. We need to have continued funding there. But unfortunately, even in the president's fiscal year 13 budget, neglected tropical diseases got the single largest percentage cut, 25% cut from an already minuscule budget. That's kind of not really cutting, that's really cutting into muscle, basically. It will basically do away with the possibility that the U.S. government could actually start investing into late-stage product development for neglected tropical diseases, and this is a real shortcoming, both in the current approach and, of course, totally eviscerates the possibility of future investments, at least for the coming, let's say, 2 years, if that budget is passed as proposed.
You know, it's interesting because one of the shifts that's occurring right now at the Gates Foundation, I said the 2 Washingtons are calling the shots. We have to pay attention to what goes on in Seattle because the Gates Foundation is responsible for about 70% of all private giving in the entire world for health-related issues. But one of the big shifts going on there is a recognition that inventing something is step 1. Doing the implementation and getting it, figuring out how best to get it in the field is really the task at hand now. And Gates has put a lot of money into basic R&D to come up with new vaccines and so on. But now they're realizing, you know, how do you get an HPV vaccine out the door when you're targeting a population group that is never usually in the system, 11-year-old girls. And not only that, you have to get them 3 times in 1 year. So, Paul, how do you work for one of the most important basic R&D corporations in the world right now, but the implementation side, especially in emerging countries, is a real challenge, yeah?
Yes, no, absolutely. So there's a tremendous amount of very good basic research being done in academia. There's a tremendous knowledge also about disease. But how to translate this now in a drug that we know works and is safe and effective is really something that the pharmaceutical industry has been working on for over 100 years now. And so we really bring that skill to the party, and especially also for diseases in the developing world, because we shouldn't forget that a company like Pfizer has more than 20,000 employees in emerging countries. So we're really implanted in those countries. We have local knowledge, and we also have done clinical trial work in those countries. So partnerships of the pharmaceutical industry with academia, with NGOs, with Medicines for Malaria Venture, for instance, project where I'm involved in, where we develop a drug for preventive treatment of malaria in pregnant women, are very, very important. It's also in New York we have partnerships to bring drugs really from the bench to the bedside, and we have a project that is called the Centers for Therapeutic Innovation. And what we're doing there is we're putting people together from Columbia University, from Memorial Sloan Kettering, and other medical centers around New York. We're putting them together with Pfizer scientists and Pfizer clinical trialists to together look at compounds and libraries of compounds and how to develop those drugs into something that will work in the clinic.
When we think of a corporation like Pfizer, at first blush, it doesn't seem obvious how cuts in the federal budget would affect anything that you just described.
Yes. In the short term, probably the impact would be barely noticeable. But I think the important impact would be in the long term, as less funds are available, to do the basic groundwork, to study diseases, to look at which mechanisms actually are involved in some of the diseases that we're studying. And those kinds of things, I think, would, in the long run, really affect us, because we would have a lot less of the basic knowledge that we then can apply to develop drugs and to prepare them for the populations that we're working in.
Well, I know Mel wishes that you had something ready to treat extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis.
They do. That's right.
And we don't.
No, they do.
They do.
Yeah, we're in
Yes,
discussion with Pfizer. One of our many either partners or potential partners.
That's right.
And in fact, is a drug that's now been in man in TB patients, and that is one of the many drugs that we're looking at incorporating into the global pipeline. And, you know, going back to the original question, you know, we practically faced the choice 2 years ago when our lease ran up and we had the opportunity to move. And clearly we could have gone just across the river toward in the western part of the world at about a 20-25% cut in rent, and decided that given all of the benefits of being in New York City, it made sense, and we stayed here in New York City, and without going through all the details. And, you know, this is just one of the examples. We just had a meeting with a couple of Pfizer representatives 10 days ago. You know, to go over the potential planning for a joint partnership. So that's just one of the examples of many that we don't have the time probably to go into with either universities, pharmaceutical companies, or other entities within this city. But those from our perspective will be dramatically impacted by cuts in U.S. government spending on global health.
How big is the NIH commitment to tuberculosis research right now?
It is small compared to, for instance, HIV, minuscule almost compared to HIV. I think, to give Tony Fauci credit, the head of National Institute of AIDS and Infectious Diseases, Tony has made the commitment to put more of what he has available on the table for TB, and we are taking certainly advantage of that. So starting at the very top, NIAID is being very supportive. They also are very limited by Congress and by the congressional appropriations. So there's a limited amount that they can do independently of the government support.
Well, I think a lot of the folks in the audience are too young to know, but we have a very special relationship to tuberculosis here in New York City. In 1990-91, we had our own epidemic involving a multi-drug resistant strain that came from Jack's territory. It originated in Tomsk, Siberia,
Right, exactly.
and I think we called it the W strain at the
Right.
time, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And our current commissioner of the FDA was then our health commissioner for New York City, leading the effort to try and understand how the heck did tuberculosis come back to this wealthy metropolis. And do you feel that that experience still resonates in New York City and informs some of the commitment to TB?
I think it informs it locally. That, the problem that we've got, frankly, from at least my perspective, going back to some of your original comments, if you look either at the head of the FDA with Peggy Hamburg, who has played a major role in her life in TB, Tom Frieden, who was her predecessor here in New York City as the New York City Health Commissioner.
He came after her.
Yeah. Right. Has a major commitment to TB. So you've got so many of the major players, but what you have is a do-nothing Congress, or not do nothing, but in fact a slash and burn Congress right now that in fact, as the Congresswoman mentioned earlier, could have a devastating impact. If we can somehow jointly get the commitment through Congress, through the administration, to really fund, then I think you've got people in a position of power to really do it right. And that's one of the issues that I think is really not just perplexing but frustrating when you look at who's in what positions around the country. And Raj Shah, we just met with Raj Shah, who is the head of USAID, and we just met with him, I guess, 2 weeks ago. So I think we've got the players in the right position, but we really have government gridlock from the perspective of really doing what's right.
One challenge we face, and I throw this out to all of you, is that we're in a time of great budget austerity with the two parties hardly speaking to each other, but one of the parties wants a very dramatic reduction in federal spending across the board. And we're also locked in this, awaiting the Supreme Court ultimate decisions on the Health Reform Act. And in both these situations, we could conceivably, within the next 2 years, see longer waiting lists for antiretroviral therapy domestically, see outages for available services for tuberculosis care right here in the United States, and have more of a sense that our domestic needs are so huge, why are we dealing with stuff overseas? What's your counter-argument to that?
Well, I'll start. I mean, certainly some of these diseases, tuberculosis, HIV, et cetera, does impact Americans. There are still 2.7 million new infections every year globally with HIV, and in New York State alone, there are 4,100. So it's not like these are just diseases that occur in Africa, Asia, et cetera. But the other reason is it's important for security. It's part of our nation building to help these economies, and it's part of our role as a global leader. So I think that there are national interests at play here as well as humanitarian interests, and doing what you can to avoid these devastating illnesses.
Yeah, first of all, going back to the comment I was making at the beginning, we're on the verge of technologically bringing unbelievably improved solutions to so many of these countries. So number one, if we do that, we can decrease our foreign aid bill by huge amounts. So financially, it's just like investing in terms of domestic technology. We're not going to get out of the foreign aid game altogether, but we might as well get the most bang for that buck, number one. The way to do that is through technological innovation that really is stimulated from places like New York. Number two, by helping those economies, which it would do, and without going through all the statistics that you're certainly aware of what the economic burden is and what therefore falls still on the U.S. If you look at a lot of the terrorist type of activities, even tying it to that, that's directly tied to the economic situation in a lot of the countries from which that arises. It influences U.S. security without a question. You've had a chance to travel, I'm sure. You go to these countries, and there is an amazing appreciation, for example, for PEPFAR money and for the U.S. aid. That so overrides all the other political influences on the attitude towards the U.S. and towards America. So it is just so penny wise and pound foolish to really buy into the argument that we have to save money internally, and that's the only way we progress U.S. interests.
Of course, it's hard to make people appreciate that global health spending is less than 0.5% of the federal budget. So cutting it isn't going to get us that magic several $trillion that we need. Jack.
Yeah, there is another interesting argument just going along with this sort of minimal investment, and that is a huge upsurge of interest among our healthcare students in global health. Fully 40% of all medical school entrants have an interest in global health. 30% of graduates have had a global health experience during medical school. They're committed, they're interested, and they want to help. And this, minimal investment, yet this tremendous human energy, I think combined can do more than a lot of our diplomacy and other activities.
This is a striking point because folks up at Columbia and at NYU tell me that their incoming public health students going for either a master's or a PhD overwhelmingly state that global health is their #1 interest. And I see this all over the country, but here in New York City, it's quite profound. And in all our allied institutions in the SUNY system, across the river, dare we mention New Jersey, and going all the way upstate into Cornell and all Ithaca College and so on, you see the same pattern repeating. And you have to wonder exactly where all these young Americans are going to work, but that's a separate issue. Paul.
They may work at Pfizer.
There you go.
And really, because when I talk about our program for malaria, for instance, the response that I get is unbelievable. It's a tremendous motivator, actually. And so from a private perspective, actually, being involved in global health is actually very important also from a just a motivational perspective, and the response is actually tremendous. And I'm always a little bit surprised about it, and maybe I shouldn't be, but how people really respond to a private company being involved with other organizations to try to solve global health problems. And so hopefully a lot of these people will come to talk to us.
It's an interesting point you make, because one of the things I do hear from the corporate sector is that there's an importance for staff morale, for the sense of having a shared mission inside the companies, for staff to be able to know we're working on this product that could save these kind of lives overseas. That seems to be a very important motivator.
Yeah, here's something that we're good at. We can develop drugs, and it's for something that really motivates our people. So personally, I see this as a tremendous advantage for us.
Well, I also think that's the case for academic institutions, and so we have a really interesting story with Pace University, actually, where in 1980, Pace discovered a drug called eflornithine, which was originally developed, I think, for anti-cancer use. It was discovered to have activity against sleeping sickness, and during the 1990s, basically, the patent holder abandoned production of the drug for sleeping sickness because there wasn't really any profit to be made. Eventually, I think in early 2000s, Bristol Myers Squibb was going to develop a topical formulation to remove unwanted facial hair in women, which sparked a bit of a controversy because you didn't have an injectable drug available for a life-threatening disease affecting Africans, yet, of course, something for cosmetic use was perfectly viable from the commercial standpoint. And the researchers at Pace, Cy Baki and his group, were quite instrumental in getting the company to restart production, firstly, and now are part of a scientific consortium that DNDi is leading that has led to the discovery of a novel class of compounds, oxyborols, which we believe could be the first oral drug for the treatment of sleeping sickness, which would treat both stages of the disease. And for those that know anything about sleeping sickness, probably one right there. What this means is that you don't have to do a painful lumbar puncture or a spinal tap on the patient to diagnose the advanced stage of the disease. This would radically transform treatment for sleeping sickness. And nobody can believe that part of the group that's been so responsible for these innovations is just at Pace right here.
We think of Pace as a business school.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, and Margie, I know that over the years, IAVI has collaborated with Merck, with Pfizer, with companies all over the region. What's the list like? How many regional companies have a relationship with IAVI?
Yeah, there are two major pharmas, Pfizer and Bristol Myers Squibb, locally, who we've collaborated with, but also biotech companies. And we find that a lot of the innovation in these diseases of the developing world, and probably a lot of innovation overall, is really coming from small biotech companies. And so we have Profectus as well as Avatar that we've collaborated with locally. And so, we're really excited about being able to do that. And that's one of the benefits of a product development partnership, and really trying to bridge the public institutions and funding with private institutions, academic centers, and philanthropic organizations to be able to do that. one of the programs we're most excited about, we had an innovation fund that was co-funded with Gates Foundation, where we were able to give out grants to biotech companies around the world, but there were some local, like the ones I mentioned. And if they had a technology that they were not currently applying to HIV, if they were, great, let them keep doing it. But if they had some platform technology that could potentially be applied to HIV vaccine research, we were able to give them grants and encourage them to do so. And two of those companies, actually are West Coast companies, but helped us in the quest for identifying broadly neutralizing antibodies, which Jack's organization was part of this early work as well. And so we really think that being able to take advantage of the private sector's capabilities like we can in New York and the great organizations we have is very helpful for these diseases.
Kind of brings up another issue. Right now, as of the latest demographic and epidemiology data released in Vital Statistics by the city health department, this is the healthiest metropolis in North America. If you want to live someplace and live a long time, live in New York City. If you want colonoscopies, we have the highest colonoscopy rate. Mammography, we have the highest mammography rate. You go down the list, it's pretty phenomenal. And we have this mayor who has a lifelong serious commitment to public health. Unfortunately, he endowed a school in Baltimore. But we can hope for, as ex-mayor, that he will see the need for more largesse locally for public health. One of the constant things that comes up in conversation is the future of Governor's Island. And Mayor Bloomberg has several times tried to get the ball rolling on the possibility of a Center for Global Health located on the northern part of Governor's Island in the old sort of post-colonial buildings. But generally, can you talk a little bit about how the political environment of New York is helpful for global health efforts? Anyone?
I'll just
okay,
come back to what I said in my opening. We wouldn't have the lab in Brooklyn were it not for the city of New York and Mayor Bloomberg, who helped us financially with tax breaks and other incentives to be able to justify being located in what would otherwise be a somewhat higher rent district than we could have found had we gone on the other side of the river, et cetera. So that is extremely important to us, and I think that ongoing support for all of our organizations will be vital.
You know, that's an easy question to answer. I mean, in our own work in Eastern Europe, when we were challenged by problems we couldn't address, we went out to find the resources that were available. For example, when there were challenges with blood safety, some of the countries we work in, we have the New York Blood Center, which is a world-famous blood research center. When we needed to get a school of public health that was going to train some of our trainees in some of the issues around issues dealt with in New York State, similar to what was going on in Eastern Europe, there's our School of Public Health in Albany, which we use. When we were looking to get people who developed interventions in substance users, well, here we had NDRI and the Center for Drug Use and HIV. So there's no question that the resources in New York are easily available. And it really runs counter to the perception that we all don't get along, because, in fact, we can and we do.
Well, I think what I'm going to do now is open it up for the audience. And do we have microphones for the audience, or do we want them to shout? Oh. Okay. Yes, we do have mics. So we have. Can I have a mic to this middle table right here, the gentleman with his hand up? Wait for the mic, please.
Coming.
And introduce yourself, please.
All right, I will reduce my voice. Thank you. This has been very interesting, and I am very appreciative of your discussion. Our concern represents much of NIME's foundation, and our interest in global programs has been quite extensive. Although I'm myself from the infectious disease sector, don't want to sound as a renegade, but I'm asking you how you view the requirement, the need for dealing with non-communicable diseases, which is a major underlayer now that the infectious diseases are in the process of being handled more rationally.
Does March of Dimes in New York have any specific effort underway in that regard?
Well, we do. We are particularly interested in reproductive health, and we're dealing with issues pertaining to two things. One is the increased rates of preterm birth throughout the world, and second, initially first, our interest in birth defects and genetic disease.
Anybody want to take that on? Non-communicable diseases.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the main benefits of what's happened in the communicable disease area is that it really lays the groundwork for the next wave of, in a sense, diseases that will have to be tackled in the developing countries. And that's obviously the non-communicable, more chronic diseases, because clearly the model for how they will be handled in the developing world will not be the U.S. or the European model. But I think the model that's being developed by many of at least the representatives that you see up here will be directly applicable to what can be done in those countries for the non-communicable diseases also. And I think that's going to be one of the great learning lessons to extend, and it will be extended, I have no doubt about that.
Yes. Paul?
Yes. Well, first of all, I fully agree. Non-communicable diseases are becoming incredibly important, and I recently saw a figure of diabetes in China. 100 million people are diabetic or pre-diabetic in China, for instance, in China alone. So where I do think there is perhaps a difference is how to approach this in different countries, and actually working together with the local governments, I think, will be very important in how to address this as well, because different governments see the problem differently. So some governments really have not woken up to the time bomb they're sitting on in terms of obesity and diabetes, hypertension, and so on. And some governments look at it, or different governments look at it through a different lens as well. So, for instance, in Russia, for instance, this is seen as a national security problem more than anything else. So the approach, I think, should be different in different parts of the developing world or the emerging countries.
Let's see, right here in front.
Hello, thank you. My name is Martha Brady. I'm with the Population Council. We're an international NGO, and we are a PDP, and I sit on the PDP Access Working Group with, I think, many of your colleagues at your agencies are on. I have two thank you all. They were great presentations, discussions. I have two questions I'm curious about. And that we work primarily in the reproductive health and HIV arena, but we are also working a lot on both in the product development, preclinical as well as clinical trials, and also access, but around combination products, okay? So multi-indication, those products that provide more than one indication. And I'm curious, perhaps our colleague from Pfizer might be able to speak to this, the issue of, we've heard often that you need to have a viable commercial market for a product, okay? Otherwise, you have to rely on donors, essentially, because of the global burden of disease, and we don't have, thankfully, all places in Africa I've been, and I've never gotten sleeping sickness, so I appreciate the work that you do, but there's not a really viable commercial market, right? So the notion of having a product that has a viable commercial market in the U.S. or Europe, a la sexually transmitted infection prevention, but then can cross-subsidize a essentially non-existing market, really, in the developing world. And I'm just curious about that issue.
This goes to the classic question. How do you pull things off the shelf and into production if the target population hasn't the resources to pay for it?
Actually, perhaps the malaria program would be a good example. So it's a combination product and a combination of an antibiotic and an old anti-malarial standby. And what we try to do to make this viable, I'm not saying that we're going to grow rich of it at all, but what we try to do is from the beginning, built into this program, things that would reduce costs, and also we try to work with international organizations that would either finance part of the development or finance the purchase of the product. So in terms of formulating the product, we went actually to an Indian generics manufacturer, and who at very, very low cost formulated the combination product for us. We also, our partnership with Medicines for Malaria Venture pays a quite important part actually of the development costs of at least the phase 3 program, which again makes this more palatable to certain committees to which I present often. And then also early on in the program, we talked to organizations like the Clinton Foundation, for instance, also Gates and so on, to make sure that once this product is developed, that there might be on the business end of it, that there might be interest in perhaps purchasing this product and so on. So there are things you can do over the development of the drugs. One of the things also that I'm particularly focused on is to look also at products that have already been developed for another indication, because the important thing there is that the program is very, very much de-risked. You already know the profile of the drug, you know what the major side effects might be, and the major cost actually has been spent. The major money has been spent. So if you then look at another indication, it's really a fraction of what the cost would be to develop a drug from scratch. So
well, of course, we have the classic story of Merck and ivermectin, and you had a veterinary use that brought the profits that allowed the donation of product for medical use. But Rachel, you're right in the middle of this question.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the risk of being the sort of pinko heretic on the panel, I think there's another way of looking at the challenge, which is sort of, is it going to make sense for the long term to continue to have an R&D model based on the notion that you recoup your investment in research by having exorbitantly priced medicines that basically nobody can afford? Is there another way of thinking about innovation that disconnects the price of the cost of R&D from the price of the final product, particularly when you're talking about A, diseases for which there's no lucrative market, B, where a lot of the risk has been essentially kind of taken on either by a product development partnership, a philanthropic actor, or a public sector funder, in which case then it would be our view that those drugs should be developed as public goods.
One of the things that's coming down the pike very soon is the first cardiovascular polypill, which will have medication to address at least 4, if not 5, preventive indicators, blood pressure, cholesterol issues. Yeah, exactly, the whole range. And that's likely to be immediately profitable in the wealthy world for obvious reasons. And might it be possible to see that the cost for distribution in poorer countries could be offset by the profits garnered in the wealthy countries?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that the word that you use that really resonates, and we have partnerships with, I think, 6 of the contractual relationships with like 6 of the 10 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And the key in every one is de-risking. So that's really, you have to basically take away as much of the risk up front as possible in order to make the end game look completely different. Yeah. And that end game can look completely different in terms of profit margins, in terms of distribution of the products around the world, in terms of using profits in one area to supplement in another area, because there always will be countries that can't even afford the drug, no matter how cheap will you make it. So the whole game really starts way up front with the ability of really taking on a different business model to engage right at the beginning. And that's where we get into back to the funding problem. Because where does that money come from? That comes from philanthropic and government sources. And if those dry up, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, way in the back.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm Scott Ratson. I'm Vice President of Global Health at Johnson & Johnson. First, want to thank Mary for convening this. I'm a former ambassador of Global Health Research with Research America, and we have lobbied strongly in Washington. My question is broader, why I'm really happy to be here today in New York, and want to thank you, Laurie, for your continued advocacy in the area. And my disclaimer is, with Mel, we Johnson & Johnson and the TB Alliance have a lead candidate there. With Pfizer, we have a lead candidate for Alzheimer's disease. With DNDi, we have a lead candidate for helminths, transmitted helminths, deworming. We have a lead candidate vaccine with HIV, supported with J&J, Department of Defense, NIH, a lot of these pieces that all go together, and a lot of other work, of course, in the HIV field. So my question is, being here in New York, in the heart of the financial district, how can we move from what I've heard from the panel, the past ways of doing business, to new ways of doing business? Are there new innovative financing mechanisms vis-a-vis what's gone around in the world for whether you want to call them a tax, whether you want to call them a fee, whatever it's called, that we inject more funds into global health? Because of my other disclaimer, formerly working at USAID, if we only rely upon the agencies that we currently have, we won't have the future revenue streams that we need. And we have to think of some unique ways of doing that. So my question, it's perhaps to all of the panel, but more to you, Laurie, who see the future in global health and have been so successful in bringing it to the foray, why we have schools there where 30% of incoming students want to invest in global health, their time, their resources. The U.S. government looking at new ways of investing, not only in basic research, but public health research, applied research, the scaling up that's necessary for vaccines. How can we go about doing that with some new pieces that might be local legislation, statewide, or other ways where public-private
Okay, we
groups
got
can get
your
together?
question.
Yeah.
From a, and first of all, I would urge everybody that hasn't already to pull up Bill Gates' annual letter. Each year he puts out a very exhaustive letter filled with interesting data and so on. In his most recent annual letter, he went through all the innovative financing schemes that are currently on somebody's agenda, whether it's the Robin Hood tax or it's direct currency trade tax or something akin to the Tobacco Convention and the money it generates for a broader set of issues. And you know, the gist of it is we could cover most of what we call both communicable and non-communicable global health efforts through a variety of interesting levies, taxes, whatever you want to call them. But in order to put those in place, you need broad support. You need to have Wall Street sign on and say, we don't mind if 0.1% of our transactions that are over, I think it's $20 million in size, will get a tax.
We just need to figure out how to not call it a tax.
Well, a levy, a donation, a transaction, whatever. And I think at this point we're still pushing like Sisyphus up that hill. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to it, having been involved in the development of the advanced market commitment. At that point, I was leading Merck's global vaccine business, but I was on the Gavi board and representing the industry and a lot of the discussions on how do we make this work. And for those of you not familiar with it, Wyeth had a pneumococcal conjugate vaccine on the market that was extremely successful, but it was not accessible in the developing world. Now, that vaccine wasn't designed for the serotypes that exist in the developing world. And so you needed a whole new development program, and then you needed to build manufacturing capacity, which would have been an investment of hundreds of millions at a minimum. And so the advanced market commitment was put together as the GA countries came together and said, we're willing to commit that a market will exist up front. Because if you're going forward at a company like Pfizer to your management committee or board saying, I need you to approve this investment program in a new form of this vaccine, which will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, the first question you're going to be asked is, well, what will the revenue be? What will we generate at the end of this to justify the risk in the upfront investment? And it was unclear if there would be a market for that. And so these countries decided we're going to put the funding in place, guarantee that that market will be available, and then allow different companies to come in and participate in the market. There's no guaranteed market share. You still have to compete vis-a-vis having a competitive profile for your vaccine. And then they set it up such that there would be adequate pricing in the upfront years of the program so that you could reap some return on your investment, but then it would go down to a price that hopefully the countries could afford, a tail price, to make that sustainable. Developing world manufacturers were allowed to get in the game and participate as well, and many of the multinationals then found partners in the developing world so that you could begin with the end in mind, knowing that you eventually were going to get down to a pretty low price. How do you make sure you have the lowest possible approach to manufacturing? So that was a very complicated scheme that was put together, but a very effective one, as I think 2 vaccines have now been approved, and there are more in development. And so can you take that model and apply it elsewhere? Well, it's either that model as is, or it could be similar models that decrease some of that upfront risk and that give you at least some assurance that there will in fact be a payer at the end of this product development cycle. I'll stop.
Well, it's interesting before you gag on us. It's interesting.
Anybody got some water for her, by the way?
It's interesting that we don't have similar dilemma in the veterinary world. Why? Because we have a clear sense of what a chicken is worth. There's a clear monetary value to a chicken, to a livestock pig, but not to human beings. And so, every new strain of H5N1 that emerges, the bird flu, a vaccine is very quickly manufactured. Whether it's manufactured by a Vietnamese company, an American company, a Chinese company, not really the relevant issue. The issue is there's a driving value loss if you allow the pandemic to keep circulating and wiping out chickens. And similarly, we have now a out-of-control foot and mouth disease epidemic in Egypt that has now spilled over into the Palestinian territories, Jordan, and Israel. And it turns out it's vaccine-resistant strain. Well, you can believe that at least 8 companies are now going full tilt trying to come up with a vaccine for this particular strain of foot and mouth disease. So we have a kind of perverse economics here. Humans are not worth enough to come up with an instantaneous way to rev up your vaccine or drug manufacturer, but animals are, livestock animals. And that's a kind of interesting problem we have. Let's see if we have another question. My colleague, I see you in the back, Mike
Yes.
Hoden, who
Thank you.
works with us at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm not sure if this is working, but
Yeah.
even though Dr. Ratz and I are sitting next to each other, I thought I'd offer another perhaps way of thinking about his question, which I think is critical, namely, are there some new models? I would just suggest that a data point is the array of sectors that are increasingly interested in and spending lots and lots of money on matters of health is growing every year. So you look across the financial services sector, technology, obviously the food sector, their interest and engagement in matters of public health is huge and way more than it was, let's say, a decade ago. And I would just suggest, therefore, that in trying to understand where some funding and models for funding might come from, that an array of sectors be brought together from the private sector, not just those who have the word health or pharmaceutical in their names.
Well, one of the other areas that's sort of related, but not completely, is with the attempt at so-called impact investment, which many of you are probably aware of. And one of the major investment houses in New York is taking this on now, and there may even be announcements in the not-too-distant future about setting up funds funded by either the private individual or private or corporate sector that really is geared towards accepting a much, much lower return on their investment in return for a public good. And really going one step further in terms of marrying the community and the investment purposes to be backed by organizations perhaps like the Gates Foundation, so that there is a stop on the downside loss potential. So I think there really are innovative approaches that still require obviously a lot of working through that could in fact apply and be meaningful down the road.
You're reminding me of another New York-based effort, the Acumen Fund, which does exactly what you're describing, solicits direct investment for health and development innovations, with the investor knowing the return will be very, very small. Frankly, even a very small investment at the peak of the recession was a darn good investment. Let's see if we have another question way in the back over here.
Hi, my name is...
It's working.
Hello. My name is Thomas McIntyre. I'm actually a general surgeon, so some of you may be wondering why I'm even here. But I work at Kings County Hospital with Dr. DeHovitz, and I've been spending a lot of time working at establishing surgical services in the developing world. And what I've uncovered is just how far behind we are in terms of surgery. Just for some stats, the bottom third of the 2 billion people do not even have access to essential emergency surgery. There are 56 million people in sub-Saharan Africa that need surgery today. So in terms of surgery, we're far behind in this arena. And I guess my question to the panelists is should our global health discussion become more global, especially with all the talk of the funds being less and less and less? Where do we fit into the picture? And if we do fit into the picture, how do we advocate for something that's traditionally neglected? And perhaps you can speak to that as well. Thank you.
Actually, there's a lot. I mean, MSF would be the best organization, I think, in my view. I'm slightly biased here. To talk about some of the innovations that have gone on in the field around trauma and surgery and surgical care in general. I'll be heading to Haiti tomorrow, actually, for MSF, where MSF's going to be opening up a hospital there, one of two, specifically around trauma and surgery. But it's not going to be, I mean, like so many of the infectious diseases that we're all dealing with, it's not going to be the case, I don't think, that we're just going to transplant exactly what's done here into a resource-limited setting. It's about how to do that novel adaptation that we learned about with HIV and that we are learning about for TB, malaria, and so many other communicable diseases, and how to think about shifting tasks that we think need to be done by specialists in this setting to non-specialists and other health categories. I'm speaking totally outside of my realm of expertise here, but I just think there are lessons from the sort of infectious disease universe that we can certainly apply not only to non-communicable diseases but also to surgery and trauma.
Well, it's interesting, when the earthquake hit Haiti, the pre-existing hospital that did not suffer earthquake damage was Cornell Weill's collaboration with GISECO. That was a HIV treatment center and became the primary trauma care center for a period of time. And similarly, we see a lot of efforts arising out of New York community to come up with ways to improve surgical training. I think of Touch, the program that's jointly run by McKinsey and Cornell Weill, that is trying to, has built a large medical school in Mwanza, Tanzania, and with a heavy emphasis on surgical training. And Vanessa Carey, who's a physician, daughter of a Carey you may have heard of, has, from Harvard together with folks at Cornell, set up a surgery sort of goodwill program where young surgeons will commit to a certain number of weeks a year where they will work overseas in resource-scarce settings, providing both treatment, surgical treatment, but also training of local personnel, and USAID is partially subsidizing it. This is a new effort that just grew out of a joint Boston-New York commitment. I think, Jack, you had a one-finger.
I see a 5-minute warning there, but I just want to lay out one issue. We've talked about infectious diseases as they've laid the basis for all this work, and then we've talked about non-communicable diseases, now surgery, and of course we can't forget the burden of mental health care, which is one of the leading causes of disability in the developing world. So all these require leadership, preferably at least initially NIH and federal dollars, and then hopefully will lead to other areas. But the burden goes far beyond the infectious disease piece we've been focusing on.
Well, it certainly does, but we've got to protect what budget we can. And we are, I think, one of the main messages that comes out of this entire panel discussion and Congresswoman Lowey's remarks earlier is that we are in a defensive posture right now. The dependency on U.S. funding is so great and has become so much greater since the 2008 financial crisis, that any cuts meted out from Washington are going to have a very profound and immediate effect on programs on the ground all over the world, and on the ability of the multilaterals to continue functioning. By that I mean institutions like WHO and the Global Fund. And I think I want to thank our panel and the smart questions from the audience. And hand things over to Mary for a bit of a wrap-up on today's event and conversation.
Yes. Applause is definitely in order for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you, everybody. I think we heard a lot of new ideas, a lot of enthusiasm for innovation, for new models, and a commitment to making sure that we protect the budgets that we have right now. And that is absolutely, certainly a message for today. We hope that you will pick up and use the kinds of tools that you'll find on the tables outside, ranging from the one-page fact sheet on global health research in New York, also the public opinion poll data, and the materials from our partners, and what to do with those. Don't just take them home and put them on your desk or your coffee table at home. Give them to someone who doesn't, whoa, what happened there? That's all right. You're all on. Oh, all right. No earthquake involved. But give them to someone who doesn't know yet what you do every day to make a difference for health domestically and globally. And there's more of those people than you might think. And you might also think about reaching out to your own member of Congress. We'll do a little quiz that I will get you all involved in. I call it the Starbucks test. So let's say that you're at your local coffee emporia, whatever it may be, on any day of the week, and your member of Congress, the person who represents you in the Congress, is there on the same errand, because they, of course, drink coffee also. So raise your hand if you would recognize that person by sight. Raise your hand. Okay? Now raise your hand if that person would recognize you by sight. Oh, there's one or two, maybe three in the four. That's about typical for in my experience, for a research-related kind of audience. I got to tell you something. It is not typical of other kinds of audiences that seek to impact and ultimately are very much affected by decisions that member of Congress and their colleagues are making. The members of Congress in your district know people who are making a difference for that local community, for the country, and for the world by sight, by name, and they know how to connect the dots, because people from other interests, be they education, banking, transportation, defense, you name it, have made their case. They've made it their business to not just vote, that's important too, and this is an election year, but to connect those dots, to make the case. And as I say, you can do it by the investment of a huge amount of time, and that'd be great if you have that kind of time. But you can also make it very easily by email, by letter, by fax, by a visit, by showing up at a town hall meeting. This is what you all stand for, what you do every day, what you believe in, is too important to leave it to somebody else, this year especially, this election year. So I really urge you to get involved. We can help you at Research America and make the difference to make political realities align with the realities of what you've committed your career to. And thank you for being with us today, and one more round of applause for the panel.